So if you play guitar and you want to make your own music, you have a lot of choices to make. Whether it's a new modeling amplifier or a revolutionary new plugin or pedal, or maybe it's a new take on the guitar, guitar players have more options and tools available to them today than they ever have in the history of the instrument. But sometimes more options doesn't always mean better. As the character Neo from the Matrix films once said, the problem is choice. I've been playing guitar myself for a number of decades, and I've been recording on computers since the late 90s. I've tried all kinds of interfaces and DAWs and outboard gear, different kinds of effects that have come and gone. But in the past year, I've come across a particular pedal that has really revolutionized how I work in the studio. It's allowed me to streamline the way that I work. It's allowed me to commit to the sounds that I record, whether I'm recording them or mixing them. And I feel that it's helped make me a more effective songwriter. Isn't that the point? So I'd like to share this piece of gear with you. It's called the Strymon Iridium. This is the Strymon Iridium pedal. This is a guitar pedal, but it's not meant as a guitar effect pedal in the sense where it's not trying to be like a Boss distortion or a digital delay pedal or maybe an MXR phaser or something like this. It's not an effect pedal. It's really meant to be used as an amp replacement. And so it says amp and IR cab. It's basically emulating digitally amplifiers and cabinets. And these are very, very convincing emulations of these amplifiers and cabinets. And I'll kind of go over those in just a minute. But some of you may be thinking, why would I want to replace my tube amp? My tube amp sounds great. Why would I want to, replace it with this little digital recreation? Well, there's kind of two use cases I feel that this pedal is meant for, two types of people. The first one is in the studio. So say, you have your great tube amp at home and it sounds great when you crank it up, but say you have an idea and it's midnight and your family's asleep. Well, you can't crank your amp, right? You don't want to wake them up. This is where this pedal comes in handy because you can plug it into your interface and, record any idea you have and dial in some really great sounds, and you never have to wake anyone up. Same thing for the live scenario. If you're a person that gigs a lot, maybe you're playing a small coffee shop or a small bar, and you take your amp to the bar and you crank it up, you get your tone, and then the sound guy comes to you and says, "Hey man, that's just too loud. I can't work with that." And you might say, "Well, that's my tone. Like that's how I get it." And the sound guy might say, "Well, I'm sorry, that's too loud for the room. You have to turn it down." And then when you have to turn your amp down, you're not getting the tone that you want. The Iridium is also great for that as well, because you can literally take this with you instead of your amp and get really great sounds that you can just give right to the front of house. You can give right to the sound guy and he'll put it through the PA speakers in your monitor and you'll find you'll get some really great tones. So it's really great for the studio and the stage. So what I'd like to go over next is what are these amplifiers and cabs that the Iridium is reproducing. So here on the top is the amp switch. It has three different settings: the round, the chime, and the punch. The round is meant to emulate a Fender Deluxe Reverb, the 65 Reverb amplifier. The chime is meant to do the Vox AC30 Top Boost. And then the punch is meant to be a Marshall Plexi. So even without touching any of the tone controls here, you get three separate amps which sound and feel very different from each other. So that's you already have three great sounds out of the box. But in addition to emulating the amp, they also emulate the cabs. And so you might have heard the term IR or impulse response. I know there's a lot of confusion on exactly what an impulse response is. I won't give you the technical explanation, but you can think of it as a digital recreation of a speaker cabinet. So in the case of like a Marshall Plexi, you may have a 4x12 half stack. So that 4x12, has four 12-inch speakers in it. An IR It can be a digital recreation of a 4x12, or it can be a recreation of a 2x12, or a 1x10, or a 1x12. So it basically lets you pair up a digital recreation of a speaker with a digital recreation of an amp. And I can tell you that it sounds very, very good. Whether you're playing live or whether you're playing in the studio, Strymon's done a really amazing job of the recreations that they've done here. But what's really cool about this system is if we flip around to the backside of the Iridium, you can see that it's got a USB port here. It's the little, I think that's a USB port. I'm not quite sure. USB-B port. Not really sure, but basically it comes with a USB pedal or a USB plug when you buy the pedal, and you can plug this into your computer. And so Strymon offers their Impulse response. It's their Impulse Manager software that you can download from their website, and that lets you swap out any of the 3 cabs that you want. So you don't have to use the stock cabs that Strymon gives you. You can get some great cabinets from a lot of companies. I myself have swapped out some of my cabinets, and I'll show you those in a minute. I use and prefer the York Audio cabinets. These are really amazing cabinets, and I'll demonstrate those sounds in a minute. In addition to also allowing you the ability to connect it to your computer for the impulse responses, you can also use it to connect for firmware updates. So if Strymon has any new firmware, you can get it from their website, and you can download it to the pedal just by connecting it to your computer. Now there's also some options here regarding MIDI. So if you're familiar with MIDI, if any of you have a MIDI setup, Strymon does allow you to work with your MIDI setups, but it does not have the MIDI 5-pin DIN connector. It does use a proprietary sort of, Strymon quarter plug. So you either have to use Strymon's external accessories to use this, or you need to use some kind of a converter or something like this. But if you're not a MIDI person and you don't even know what MIDI is, you don't even need to worry about it because it's not even needed. You can use the pedal and all its amazing features without ever touching the MIDI. The other thing that it also has is stereo out. So you can see on the back here, it has one single quarter jack for your guitar to plug in, and then it has an out left and an out right. Basically, what that would allow you to do is if you're going into, say, an effect pedal, like maybe you have a stereo reverb or a stereo delay, and you're playing live and you want to make sure that those effects are in stereo, you can put that in stereo. Or if you want to record yourself in stereo, this is a great option for that. But honestly, I am not using any of these features. I'm only using the one plug in, one plug out. So you can see here, I've set the little switch, the stereo mono sum switch there. I've just set it to mono. I'm just using it very basic, where I'm just plugging my guitar into it, and then the output's going into my interface to record. And so that's how I'll be using it today. Okay, so I want to briefly go over the controls of the Iridium here. The first one we have is the drive control. You can actually think of this as the volume of the amp. Whether you're on the Fender or the Vox or the Marshall, you can sort of think of that as the volume control. If you actually had the amplifier itself and you're turning it up, that's basically what the drive is. The next one is the level. That basically, you can think of that as the level of the unit. Try not to think of it as the level of the amp itself. It's more meant to be the level that you're sending your signal to. So if you want a hotter signal going into your DAW, or you're trying to send to the front of house, this is essentially your volume control for the overall pedal. And then we have the usual controls of the bass, middle, and treble. But because a lot of these amps, like the Deluxe Reverb and the Vox AC30, they don't have their own mid control. This middle control serves as a sort of separate function for each of the amplifiers. And we'll kind of go over that once we get into the sounds aspect of it. And then the next one we have here is the room control. Now, I know a lot of people have thought of this as a sort of reverb control. It's not really a reverb control, so much of it as it is almost like a mic control. So if you ever mic'd up an amplifier and you put it really close to the cab, that's kind of what this emulates. And so if it's all the way off, you can think of it as a very close mic'd sound. That mic is right up against the speaker grill. But what it allows you to do when you turn it up is it's like you're pulling that microphone farther away. And so you can really hear the ambience of the room, especially if you're listening in headphones. It's a very cool feature because sometimes you don't always want to have a super close mic presence sound. Maybe you want to pull it back a little bit and get a little ambience of the room. This pedal lets you do that. So it's sort of like a reverb, but think of it more as a mic control where you're pulling it farther back or putting it more forward. And then lastly, we have the favorite control. And so this is a really handy control because you can dial in any amp and cab in any setting that you want. Say you find a really great, like golden go-to setting that you want to have. Once you set that and you hold down the favorite, it will save those settings into that favorite. So no matter where you change the controls, you can always return to that point. And that's a really handy feature if, say, you're in a nice crunchy Marshall sound and you've got it dialed a particular way, and then maybe you set your favorite to, say, a nice chimey Vox sound or a nice clean Fender sound. You hit that favorite and it'll go right back to that setting you had. So it's almost kind of like it allows you to switch between the two amps. It's a really useful feature live, or even if you're in the studio and you have a go-to setting that you always want to go to, maybe you couldn't remember what it was. This is a great way to do that. And then lastly, we have the on control here. And so that lets you turn the pedal on or off. And we'll demonstrate what it sounds like with the pedal on and with the pedal off. Okay, let's dial in some sounds so you can hear what this thing sounds like. I'm just using my Fender Road-Worn Stratocaster with the Fender Tex-Mex pickups on it. And I'm just using the neck pickup direct into my interface. Here's what it sounds like, perfectly clean, without the Iridium on. That's nice. I mean, it's clean. It's kind of brittle. It's kind of plain, neutered. Let's try the Iridium, and we're going to use the Fender setting with one of the cabs that I've selected. I'm using a cab from York Audio. Yeah, that's a lot better. It's got more character to it. Let's add the room control. So we're going to pull the mic back from the speaker, basically. That's really nice. About this middle control, on the Fender model, it's meant to sort of be the Fender blackface, like your typical Fender Deluxe 65 Reverb. And then once you get it past middle, according to Strymon, it starts to get into that older tweed amp category. And I guess this kind of gives you a little more scoop and a little more gain to the sound. So that's really nice. Just getting some really nice clean sounds. But just like with a Deluxe Reverb, you can crank it up, and you can tell that with my Strat, it's buzzing just like it would with the amplifier, because we're increasing the gain on it. So let's get really rocking here for a second. And you can really hear now with the room control how that mic sounds really pulled back from the amplifier. Let me back it off a bit. So that sounds really, really nice. Let's try a different cab here. So it's already kind of changed the characteristic of how the amp sounds. Finally, we'll try the third speaker. You can already hear, just by changing the speaker, the gain setting was completely different from this to this. It's a little more mellow, a little more rounded, but we can still crank the drive on that guy. So that's the Fender model. I think it really has a really great character, especially here in the headphones that I'm listening to. It really sounds like I'm listening to the amp. It's a really great tone. Okay, next we're going to move on to the Chime model, the Vox AC30 Top Boost. And you will hear that this one already is really different. Now on the Vox, if I recall from Strymon's video where they went over this, this focuses as like a top cut. So it will really affect the sound of the amp based on where you have it set. So let's try it all the way off. Up to the middle. 3/4. It's got a very mellow sound, almost jazzy, like if I were to play with my thumb, it really has a nice round attack there. And then all the way up. Very dark, mellow sound. Almost makes my Strat sound like a hollow body or something. So that's kind of what that does. We'll try the second cab that we have here. Already it's a lot more jangly. And then finally the third one. So that one also has less gain than this one, and I haven't even touched the settings. Okay, so now we're moving on to the Marshall Plexi. This one also has a very different character than both the Vox and the Fender. It's a lot more punchier, hence the punch channel. So we'll give a listen to a few of these sounds. So that's really nice. It's got sort of a bassiness to it that the Vox doesn't, but it's still a nice smooth character. So we'll adjust a little bit of the tone here. Yeah, it's a really present sound. Let's add a little room, see how that sounds. Crank the gain. Oh wow, that's already starting to sound a bit like Hendrix. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's try that with some different cabs. Yeah, that's great. And finally, we'll try the third cab. Man, that's just... Now, Strymon has also said that you can really crank this gain. It can't quite get into metal territory, but you can definitely get some really rockin' sounds out of it. Yeah, that's great. That almost kind of has like a Stevie Hendrix on steroids kind of sound. And remember, this is just with a Stratocaster. Haven't even plugged in a different guitar, so it gets some really great sounds. You know, cranking the room up with the mic. It's like you're in the room with the amp when you have headphones on. It's a really great sound. So thank you guys for checking out my video on the Strymon Iridium. It really is a great pedal, and in my case I use it as a clean pedal platform in the studio. I'm a hard rock metal fan, so I like to use different kinds of distortion pedals, and I think that this pedal really pairs very well with various types of distortion. So stay tuned for my next video where I'll show you an example of how I pair the Iridium up with one of my favorite distortion pedals. Thanks again, and if you're not, hope you subscribe, click the like button, And stay tuned to Zero Dave Gear for more reviews.